Hello again and welcome back to our course on PSE 15. We're going to look now at another technique for removing, or I should say hiding, objects in an image, and that's to use the clone stamp tool. If you remember how we got rid of the fence posts using the healing brush earlier on, the approach with the clone stamp tool is fairly similar. The idea is that we identify an area of the image and we make a clone, usually a multiple clone of that, to obscure the object that we're trying to remove. Let's take this image that we've used before. Let's suppose that I wanted to get rid of the collecting can in front of this cyclist. Let's first of all choose the clone stamp tool. That's that one there. There are actually two stamp tools. There's the clone stamp and there's the pattern stamp. The pattern stamp is one where you can stamp a pattern onto an object in order to obscure it or add some interest, or for whatever reason. I'm going to leave you to experiment with that one. We're interested here in the clone stamp. So let's see what I can do about obscuring that tin. I'm going to zoom in first. Now I've got the clone stamp tool selected. What I'm going to do is to do a bit of cloning. So it's going to increase the brush size a little. I'm going to hold the Alt key down and create my clone. Now let me stamp on the bottom of the tin. Okay, that looks good. Why don't I brush across it? Now, of course, if the tin's going, its shadow is going as well. It's very often the case when you're using the clone stamp that a combination of clicking and brushing gives you the best results. What I'm going to do now is to clone the gap between the two paving stones. So what I'm going to do is to just slightly reduce the brush size. That's fine. Hold the Alt key down to start my clone. Release it. Then go over to the start of where I want it to be. And that's fine. I've now got that gap. This is definitely not a particularly easy cloning job because we actually have several different parts of this image currently behind the can, and we have to clone each of those and replace part of the can with each of those. So it's quite a complex cloning job. I think when it's finished it's going to look fine, but it does take a little bit of time. Cloning is generally a quick option when you have typically one kind of surface. Perhaps you've got something against a hedge or some trees or something, and what you're going to do is to clone a section of the hedge and basically stamp it onto the object that you want to hide. Having said that, I'm going to do a little bit more work on this now, and let's see what I can come up with. Join me again in just a moment. And there we are. There is my finished attempt at removing that tin. I think it's pretty good. If you wanted to practice this yourself on the same image, you might try to remove the stand under the bicycle. I think that would create quite a good effect. And the final point here is one of the options there is aligned, and I suggest that you read about aligned in the Adobe PDF. Basically, you would keep that checked if you were cloning over a long area. So for instance, if you were going to clone out a telegraph wire and you were going to sweep right across a telegraph wire with a pre-selected sample, you deselect that in situations when you're taking perhaps a small area, a small sample area, and you're repeatedly using that area over and over again. In this particular case, I sort of used a combination of those because the continuous lines, the gaps between the paving slabs, was a good example where I would keep a line selected, whereas filling in areas of the slabs, which is basically patches of a same or very similar colour, I would tend to do with clicking rather than sweeping over an area. But again, it's largely down to personal preference and experimentation. That's the clone stamp tool. I'll see you in the next section.